All right. So, hello everyone to the webinar. We'll be talking today about the news in the state budget for 2025 in Portugal and how it could help business owners to manage their business or decide to come and start their business in Portugal. We'll just let a few seconds for everyone to log in. A couple of important informations. So we'll do a briefly presentation with just some basics and things to spark the discussion. But most of this webinar will actually be for you to be able to pose questions to us. So we expect around 15 minutes for just a brief presentation, and then the remaining 45 minutes for questions from the audience. How can you leave the questions? On the right, you should see a button, a little box with a question mark, and you can go in and type your question there. Please do on that box with a question mark, not the chat, and we'll pick the questions after the brief initial presentation. I see some people already leaving questions, so great. Exactly, that's the place to be at. And any questions that we might not be able to answer here today, as we plan on running this for 1 hour, so from 3 to 4 p.m. Lisbon time, we'll follow up with you over email. So let's just give a few more moments for everyone to join in. By the way, quick intros. So my name is Pedro Henriques. I'm the founder and CEO at Bridgin, and today I have George, our senior chartered accountant, with us, and we will be talking about the measures in the state budget from the Portuguese government that affect, hopefully in a positive way, business management in Portugal. So just to recap again, for everyone that might be joining in the meantime, and we do have a big audience today, so thanks everyone for joining again and for the interest shown. We'll no doubt keep on having these webinars as we hear very good feedback about them and we have seen a strong interest. So we'll be talking for about 1 hour, the duration of this webinar. First 15 minutes, a brief presentation, some context about the latest measures on the state budget, and then plenty of time for a lot of questions. If you do have questions now during the presentation or afterwards, do use the button on the right of your screen that should have a question mark. Please feel free to go in and write your questions there, and we'll go through them at the end. All right, so see more people joining, but this is also recording, as you might be seeing on the screen. So I suggest that we keep going. So again, hello everyone. So this is a webinar from Bridgin, talking and covering subjects around the state budget for 2025. So today we'll be talking about measures by the Portuguese government and its intention to foster economic growth. Uh, some of it is measured with decisions made in terms of tax policy and some incentives that aim to attract foreign investment, but also people staying at the country and more people coming to the country. So it's a threefold measure or types of measures to foster that growth. And essentially some of them obviously also apply to existing business in the country. So we'll cover a couple of these topics, obviously with a focus on 2025. So the Portugal State Budget for 2025 does include essentially some tax exemptions for younger people. So if you are starting your career, as a taxpayer, you will have now an improved, or should I say, a reduced tax burden. There is also reduction in corporate tax, and there are new rules for new people coming into the country and becoming a taxpayer in the country. This is now called IFICI, but previously it was known as NHR. So, call it NHR 2.0 or whatever it has. But essentially, if you have not been a tax resident in Portugal in the last years, you might be eligible for some favorable tax conditions when getting into the country. All right. So these are the major updates and things that we'll cover in a little bit more detail in these next few minutes. So first of all is the lower taxation. So IRS Jovem, or this is essentially personal income tax for young people. And this is one way to attract and retain young talent. This is obviously due to some movement of some young people that have moved from Portugal abroad, and this shows the commitment of the Portuguese government to retain that critical mass of young talent within the country. Obviously, it does mean that you, as a business owner, might have an opportunity here to provide more net compensation to your staff. Another one that goes also in the same line of increasing the net compensation is the meal allowance. This is now a common update every year, but it was updated again this year, and so we have a higher tax exemption on benefit paid for meal allowance. Then the next topic is ERC reduction, or corporate income tax reduction. So essentially less tax on profits for companies, which, being a business owner is always a good news. But moreover, I should say it shows Portuguese willingness to make the country more attractive to foreign investors and for companies that want to operate here. As I said, another one is the NHR, or the new IFICI status, that is essentially for people coming into the country, that has the beneficial flat tax personal income tax bracket. And lastly, here also something that has been becoming a bit of a recurrent, it is an update on the personal income tax brackets, meaning what tax, marginal tax, applies to the different tax brackets, or just meaning at the edge you'll be able to either get an increase and not paying a heavier percentage of that in tax, or just pay a little bit more tax depending on obviously your income level. So we'll cover all of these in just a brief more detail. Again, for anyone that have joined us in the meantime, any questions, please go to the box on the right that has a little question mark, and you can type all of your questions there. Right, so we'll keep going. And so first one, this the personal income tax for young people, or IRS Jovem in Portuguese. It is indeed a program that is expanded to promote people that build their career in Portugal. This has significant tax opportunities, or discounts, should I say? And obviously, from a business owner perspective, this is a great way to potentially attract young people to be in Portugal, work out of Portugal. As we'll see next, we also have the benefit regime for everyone coming to Portugal. But regardless of that, if you hire someone local that is on the first years of their their work, so their tax-paying life, they'll have a lower taxation. And getting in a little bit more detail, so anyone typically for employees between 18 and 35 years, the age in which this is applicable has increased. I believe previous year was up to 30, so some of this measure existed, but it was improved. Then these exemptions affect the first part of your earnings up to 25K per year, and here's the meat of the subject. The tax incentives provide actually a full exemption on personal income tax for the first year of employment, again up to the 25K limit, and from the second year onwards, all the way to the first 10 years, they will have reduced tax rates, increasing throughout the 10 years. But I guess always better than not having anything. So as you can see, this makes the first year very interesting, with the no taxation on personal income tax for young people, but reduce, and a long-term commitment of 10 years of reduced taxation. And again, this means that for the same either enables you as an employer to offer more net amount, disposable income to your employees, or potentially cost you less gross employment costs to achieve the same net, that your employees might be asking on a recruitment and selection process. So, again, great opportunity for people to keep motivation from the government has been to keep people in the country, and I think a lot of businesses can leverage this fact. So the next one, which is the corporate income tax reduction. So, companies that pay less tax on profits, the personal income tax rate actually decreased across the board. So regular rate for any size company has been 21% and has now reduced to 20%. If you are a small or medium-sized business, you actually have a lower rate even, that reduced from 17% to 16% for the first 50K of taxable profit. So, particular for small, medium-sized companies, for startups as well. If you are incorporated in Portugal and you have profits up to 50K, you know that will be taxed at 16%, 1/6. And this, when you do compare all across Europe, even a country that is often recognized as a very efficient on tax purposes, like Ireland, this is very, very competitive. So again, another signal of the Portuguese government to try to attract more companies to be in Portugal. And obviously, this means that the country has become a little bit more competitive when we look at taxation, and some additional incentives actually compound to this, particularly if you are outside the main city centers. Incentives like on payroll, assistance for creating of jobs in the countryside, but also actually a tax break on R&D activities that can accumulate and can eventually reduce your corporate income tax to zero. So next one, as we mentioned, back to personal income tax, there was an adjustment on the brackets. This does mean, and this is a 4.6% adjustment on the tier. So essentially means if your employees get to a 4.6 up to a 4.6 percent increase in salary, that does not mean that they will be bumped into a higher taxation tier. Obviously, if the salary remains stagnant, it might mean, depending on where they were, they might pay a little bit less tax, but essentially is an opportunity here, for employees, for staff, not feeling that, an increase goes all down in tax. So there's a room here, and if this rate is above what was the inflation in Portugal. So the also key goal of the government here is that there is a true improvement in the net amount disposable as income for your employees. Meal allowance, again, same goal to provide more net allowance. So as of January 2025, the amount that is exempt from taxation is 10 euros and 20 cents per day. Now do notice that this is per day of work. So on average 21 days per month, or 22, depending on the calendar month. It is not paid on the vacation month. In Portugal, typically companies by law offer 22 days per year of work. So one of the months essentially there's no compensation regarding meal allowance. But the great thing about this is that it's fully exempt from taxation, both on the employee side and on the employer side. Again, it's just one way to not only improve satisfaction, the net amount available for people, and it goes around some concerns about cost of living, cost of food, expenses at the supermarket and all of that. And so this is one way of the government to increase more net for employees. By the way, do notice, and sometimes that's a question. So when we say here that this is a tax exempt in meal allowance when paid in meal card or voucher, what that means is it is simply, and there's multiple providers for this, but that amount means essentially that is paid, transfer or made available to the employee through a typical prepaid card that is limited to be used for groceries at supermarkets or food at restaurants. So you can't use this to go buy vacations or go buy a cell phone or whatever. There is an alternative that is to pay this on the payslip, but because that money can be used for anything without any control, the amount that is exempt from taxation, it is lower. So it is usually highly beneficial for companies to use the full extent of the exemption by using these prepaid meal cards or vouchers. Moving on to the next one. So the new NHR, non-habitual resident tax regime, so and now called IFICI, is essentially a tax regime for anyone that was not a tax resident in Portugal on the last, I believe, 5 years. That enables to become a tax resident and pay much less tax than most of the local commoners. So essentially, you'll be able to have a 20% flat income tax. There is some limitations. Usually, this is limited to highly qualified individuals, scientific research, innovation. So it's not exactly any low qualification position, but if you are on a high value uh, activity sector, if you are a startup, if you are technology, if the person is a high position at the company, director level, most likely you'll be eligible. And 20% income tax, it is much better than the regular progressive tax, particularly on higher rate salaries. So definitely a huge opportunity for more people to get into the country. And if you combine both, you'll see that Portugal now offers not only opportunities for relocation of senior people on a company, but also benefits for hiring young local talent. So in summary here, there is lower tax means higher net amount disposable for your employees, less cost for the company, so better profitability in the end. It is also the ability to attract more people to join your company, and I think, and this feels quite important, it is to show the renewed commitment from the government and from the regulator in improving the competitiveness of the country and attracting foreign investor. Opportunities again. There is this favorable condition, some benefits. Obviously, sometimes the devil is in the details. There has been some discussion sometimes about some abuse in some of these benefits. For instance, one of the discussion has been in real estate costs, because we did have a golden visa program, and the debate in Portugal was that was pushing the houses cost up, because if you bought a house up above a certain level, you'd be eligible for that golden visa. Now that has gone away, so there's still golden visa, but there's not available for that specific house purchase. So there's some limits, and that brings us here to the third point, which is make sure that you get the detail correct, and that you do talk with the local experts. And this is it. So a little bit more than 15 minutes, but I would love to start taking questions. So again, feel free. Anyone that joined in the meantime, please do write your questions on the bottom you have on the right with the question mark, and we'll be starting taking them one by one. So I guess the first question is if I can benefit from both the IRS Jovem, or the personal income tax for young people, and the non-habitual residence regime. And the answer is unfortunately no. So most of these incentives are not cumulative. You need to do either one or the other, but not both at the same time. So, and George, I'm taking all the time here, but make sure to keep me honest here, and I'll use you for more complex questions. But let's take another one. Can I already apply to the new NHR? Absolutely. Obviously, if you do fit the criteria. And again, criteria around this goes a lot about what you do as a professional. If it's a scientific research, just to give a little bit more detail, anything around scientific research. If you are a professor at a higher university, if you are developing, innovative products, typically a part of a startup, or if you are, senior position, director and above level of also a qualified, a company doing some innovation, you typically be eligible. I'll actually mention something else here. So one of the things that was also made into law recently is the notion of the startup status. And so some of these benefits will also be tied up with that. So again, Portugal regulators and all, there is a very pro entrepreneurship vibe. You might have heard that Portugal is a very interesting time and space to actually build your business, your startup. And so the government even recognize startup status, that you do need, just to go through some paperwork to get that status. Namely, you need to prove that you're doing something innovative, that you have, investments going into R&D activities and all of that. But having that status actually enable you to get also a lot of these benefits. It's like, you can easily prove that you are bringing to the country highly qualified individuals to do highly innovative activities if you are employing them through a company that does have that startup status. Okay, so yes, you can apply to the new HR regime if obviously you comply with the regulations. All right, so another one. Do you know if the rural allowance is still active to increase employment in rural areas? So there's the programs about the creation of jobs in rural areas are typically calls that open throughout the year, and they've been opening throughout the previous year. So it's not like there is a known program that is always open. This is more like calls. It has a budget associated with it. You need to apply. Some of the people applying will get it. Some of it won't. But so instead of knowing what might be open right now, let me just go a little bit more into what you need to know about how they usually work. Okay, first of all, let's start with what is rural. In terms of definition. So this is basically looking at the country and identify which regions of the country are more developed and which parts of the country are less developed. Anything that is on the coast is usually more developed than anything that is in on the countryside, and particularly north of Lisbon. I should say even north of Setúbal, which is just a little bit out below Lisbon. On the coast is pretty much more developed areas. So that includes, cities like Lisbon, Coimbra, Aveiro, Porto, even Braga, that might not be on the coast, but it's pretty close. So all of those sort of districts are considered more developed areas within the country. Examples of more rural areas would be Castelo Branco, would be Bragança, would be Évora, and then we have a region on the south in Algarve, which is in transition. So it does sometimes have even a third set of rules, but rule of thumb, Lisbon is the richer, it's the capital and the richer part of the country. So incentives for Lisbon will always be less than the ones available to other areas. Then anything on the main cities at the coast will typically always have less incentives than incentives made available in the countryside. Now, what sort of incentives are usually open? There has been a couple of different calls. By calls, I mean, actually like programs open that you need to follow, an application with the local government. So these calls are usually about the creation of jobs. It does go a lot about job creation. So imagine that you're an innovative company, you want to establish presence in one of the cities in the countryside, and you want to hire and creating jobs. If the timing is right, or if you wait, or if you keep an eye on it, there will be a high probability that you will have a call that you can apply to create those jobs. Those jobs, and we have seen different calls in the past, they can either be an entry level position. So when you're actually creating a new job, and you do not mind hire a recent graduate, and that's a program that actually has been running fairly predictable for a lot of years now. But there's even another program that is a little bit less prevalent, but some calls do open, for highly qualified positions. So it does not need to be entry level. It can be, a senior, experienced professional. But again, the problem with some of these programs is that they do have a budget for it. So you typically need to be attentive on when the calls open and apply fairly soon. So it's not like you can take it for granted. But again, I guess the answer here is work with an expert. Might be Bridgin, might be another company that can help you navigate that. All right. So next one here. Will real estate still be an option for Golden Visa? Well, not really. So because, as I mentioned before, has been a lot of discussion in society that the Golden Visa was bringing into the country. People just sometimes buying house, not even living on those, just speculate about the apartment or villas or whatever may be value just to get the golden visa that also had a fast track towards citizenship. And so that, social pressure made the government to suspend real estate from the golden visa program. However, you can still apply to golden visa if you are making investments, either investing on an innovative company or even start your own company. So there's still an opportunity to apply through it, but not on real estate. Okay, so let's look at another one. When a potential employee quotes their gross salary expectations, should that be expected to include the meal vouchers, or is the cost of the meal voucher sit on top of it? This is a great question that I'm afraid will have a little bit of a long answer, but hopefully, Danielle, will be a good one. This depends a lot in who you're talking to. I would say most people will not even ask for gross salary. We still find a lot of people when they share salary expectations to mention a net per month allowance or salary. And that's a big problem in the sense that then you need to follow up and ask a ton of questions so that you can actually reverse engineer that and calculate the gross annual amount. Why? Because companies, they always pay gross, right? The net salary is dependent on employee unique circumstances, right? Meaning, what is their tax situation? Are they married? Do they have dependents? Is the spouse working? Is he not? Does he have a non-habitual tax regime or the new IFICI? Are they under the personal income tax program for young people, the IRS Jovem? So none of those conditions are under the control of the company. They are individual employee conditions. Obviously, the company needs to know about them to process payroll, namely the withholding tax, but they are personal, individual employee conditions. When what that means is, um, if someone gets a new child, if someone gets divorced, all of that might impact the income tax, or will impact income tax, right, and the net amount. But to the company, it is exactly the same cost. So a company shall never discuss, well, your call obviously as business owners, but you should really not discuss compensation in terms of net. Does not mean that you won't need to help employees understand how much in their current situations that the gross salary that you're proposing means in terms of net, but do know that the net amount might vary because of all these facts, and also of changes by the government on the withholding tax. And we have seen some changes on that table. Our team has been updating the table very frequently. So, again, you should never create the expectation of commit on net. Now, back to your question about the meal vouchers. I would say a lot of people still think on excluding, so you would need to add on top. But the discussion does get murkier when you might also have other benefits, right? And the reality is, historically there's tons of benefits that you can use, and this is a big part of what we do at Bridgin, working with foreign companies that are not familiar with these matters to get experience in these matters and to help them to craft a good compensation plan. But the reality is there's tons of benefits that you can make available to your employees that have significant savings in terms of taxation. A great example is a child care voucher. So for instance, if you have a young kid below school age, but it needs to go to kindergarten, to obviously because the parents need to work. If it's on a private kindergarten, it can cost a few €100 per month, and your employer can actually issue a voucher. And voucher is the same idea of something that can exclusively be used for that means to pay for the kindergarten. That is fully exempt from taxation as well, both personal income tax and social security. So when you look at compensation, you should look much more than what is the net transfer to the bank. You should think on everything that is included, from salary, gross salary, from meal allowance, from other benefits, and your ability to be competitive, to lower total cost of employment, is to leverage the tax breaks on existing benefits. I mentioned child voucher, but there's tons more actually. So always have, and this is what we advise when you're discussing with the potential employee, you need to look at the gross compensation package, that the huge part of it, the majority part of it, will be gross salary, but then there will be meal allowance, then will be other things as well. And you control obviously the narrative. All right, so let's see the next one. I'm 42 years old, have an NHR status, great for you, and run a small business since 2022. Can I benefit from the lower tax rate for my company? So if you're talking about corporate income tax, yes, I'm pretty sure, because NHR is at the individual level and corporate income tax, it is at the company level, right, George?
Yes, that's exactly this one. So there are completely different. One is the personal perspective, the other one is company perspective. So the answer is yes.
All right. And the lower tax for corporate income tax also does not have any limitation. So the NHR has conditions to access it. The corporate income tax does not. So yes, you are eligible for it. Good news from here today. All right, another one. Any benefits for expats or foreign investors? So the main one really is the NHR 2.0 or the IFICI. So flat 20% personal income tax and on income made. Do note that there has been some changes to this program as well. One of the things that was removed was, I believe, pensions, because we did had a lot of pensioners coming to Portugal, and the rules did change that there a little bit. But anything around salary and compensation, you could come into the country and benefit from that 20% flat tax, which again, and particularly we also work a lot with tech companies, and you do know probably that anyone on the software sector usually does have pretty interesting salaries, and without the flat tax you can easily get to a very high personal income tax bracket. So definitely very useful to use that NHR regime. All right, so okay, so we're getting into green receipts. So I always love those. Okay, so from Niels, can you explain something about Social Security tax for recibos verdes, green receipts, in LDA limited company? Right. So again, not a short answer, but there's a lot of meat here to be discussed. So first of all, the so-called recibos verdes or green receipts, it's one way for independent professionals to go to the tax authority's website and essentially raise an invoice. Put it simply, it's kind of it. The key thing here is it should be independent professionals, okay, liberal professions. A good case where this applies, where this makes sense, is, for instance, an architect. You are doing some construction work, or a decorator, right, or renewing your house, and you pay such an independent professional to come in, draw some plans, and then work on the construction or the decoration. Another example could be potentially a lawyer, which is independent activity. What is not a good example for this is, let's go with a software engineer, the software developer that is working for you 40 hours a week, could be 20 hours a week, but every week, months on end, working most likely in your schedule, maybe with your working tools. You cannot use green receipts for paying this person. If you are doing so, this is easily proved that is a misclassification of independent worker, which carries fines. And you will be liable to offer this person a permanent work contract. And you probably don't want that. You probably try to avoid the complexity of regulations and go with green receipts, and you end up being liable for a permanent work contract. Do note that a permanent work contract past the probation period can be very hard to terminate, because it needs essentially an agreement between the parties. So I cannot stress enough that you do not want to use green receipts on anything that is not independent work. Now, Social Security, which is your question, and I guess on the taxation side. So what you have that is, even if there are people abusing these green receipts and are in fact dependent workers acting as independent workers to apparently get some lower taxation, the reality is the tax man is not dumb. So they know that you might be using this as a way to lower your payroll costs. And so one of the things that will happen, if someone, dependent or independent, if someone is issuing green receipts to you and you as a client, as someone paying for those receipts, for those invoices, represent over, I believe it's 50%, right, George? Over 50% of the income of that person, you will be called to pay the social security of that person. So imagine, employing someone, you budget for it, it's fine, you receive the invoices or the green receipts every month, and then 1 year from now, you'll receive a tax a letter from the Social Security say, oh, now you need to pay a ton more money because you were using this mechanism to dodge the payment of Social Security contributions. So again, don't do it. If it's something working for you on a recurrent under your orders, it's a dependent work, you need to employ them, not use this regime. LDA status. So limited liability companies. I'm assuming here that you might be referring to what is sometimes called as B2B. So for instance, someone creating a sole ownership company and invoicing from that company someone else. If you do have a business and you are invoicing someone else, that's fine. But again, the tax man, it is not done. So if we incorporate a company to invoice 100% of your revenue to one company, you'll be probably found out, and through what is called the fiscal transparency regime, you will be called to pay not corporate income tax, but personal income tax, meaning taxman is not dumb. They know when people are trying to avoid the system and taxations. So yeah, I think the rule of thumb is to be on the right side of the law always. If you have someone that is a true independent worker, it is fine to use green receipts. Just be careful if they invoice you over 50% of their income on a given year, because it will still cost you Social Security contribution on top. But if it's a spot work, something that happens a couple of days in a year, you probably never hit 50%, so you'll be fine. If it's a dependent worker, someone that is working full time or almost full time for you, it should not be through green receipts, and it should not be through a limited company, as he will most likely be hit with the fiscal transparency regime as well. Anyway, sorry, long answer, but hopefully it was clear enough. Oh, okay. So the very specific one. To what extent can Atis law be used to pay future employees pre-incorporation? Okay, very niche situation here. Is there a limit to the duration or scope, especially in the view uncertain the time incorporation? Example, can you pay for 2-3 months? No. So we probably need, this feels very specific, so probably better to circle back on you later, but pretty sure that ato isolado, and in English that translate to isolated act. So it happens once, not 2-3 months. So that is no substitute for 2-3 months of salary. Absolutely not. Okay, it is something that happens once and once time only. But I would advise us to circle back on that one later on because it feels a very specific situation. All right. So next one: are there new tax incentives for startups? So there's probably two things worth mentioning here. One is, most startups will be categorized under the small and medium size. Obviously, if they are, big corporates, they are probably not a startup and they are a scale up. So they will most likely be having the benefit of the lower corporate income tax of 16% on the first 50K of taxable profit. So that's one. And like I said, the tax reduced from last year to this year. The second thing that might be interesting, but it has a completely different topic here, but something that we haven't mentioned yet on this call, is the benefits in terms of stock options. That is something that is often common in startups to offer to employees, and there has been also some interesting changes regarding that. So during the last months of the previous year, a new regulation around stock options and how they are treated was passed into law. And you know there's still some room for interpretation, and upon discussing with our lawyers and even external lawyers, I believe when we have the first people using this is when we really know how the tax authorities will evaluate everything, particularly startups that in the meantime, between when the stock options are given and when they are exercised, the startup might have become a scale up. Regardless, the intent of the law is to make those stock options only taxable when they are the right is exerted, not early on. And there is also a lower taxation on the profit generated by the increase in value. So that is a very favorable law that it was put. It is as best as what you will find elsewhere in the world, and is a significant again commitment by the lawmakers, by the government, in terms of having regulations that try to attract entrepreneurs and startups into this country. So next one, has the personal income tax been affected in any way? Yes. Like I said, one of the tax change. So if you get an increase anywhere up to 4.6%, you won't be bumped into a higher tier. So it does enable, obviously, it means more net in absolute terms. So that's one of the changes. And then there's the two programs that we've been talking throughout this webinar: the personal income tax for young people, or IRS Jovem, and the non-habitual resident, or the newly called IFICI, for non-residents that become a tax resident into the country. So those are indeed big measures with significant breaks in taxation for, again, young people or people relocating and becoming a tax resident in Portugal. All right, so next one. Oh, this is a good one from Evelyn. So I've heard there are changes in the taxation of performance bonus, like some additional exemptions. Yes, they are. Absolutely, they are. And I think if you, I'll get to the bad part of this, but on the good side of this is, again, a signal from the lawmakers to enable companies to promote, merit and paying bonus to their employees. So that's definitely a move in the right direction. The bad part about this is that it does have a lot of rules, a lot of regulations. So for instance, and I believe the amount of which you can pay a performance bonus that is exempt from taxation is up to 6% of the base compensation. But then you as a company also need to hit other metrics, like you needed to have increased your average salaries all over. And the main idea here is that you do not disguise base salary increases with one-time bonuses, right? So you can do the bonus, obviously, but you only get the exemption on taxation if you do increase the base as well. So yes, there are definitely exemptions. They are very interesting, but there is small details that you need to be aware. So as always, we do recommend talking with an expert, Bridging, or another. All right, so I actually don't know by heart. So I was looking at another one from Niels. If you work for an employer, the Social Security component, how much it is at Recibos Verdes. So I do know at the employer side, and George, I don't know if you have by top of your mind how much it is on Recibos Verdes, but if you are working through a regular work contract, your contribution for Social Security is 11%. However, you need to know, or I would say for financial literacy, it would be important to know that your company, your employer also plays an additional contribution of 23.75%. So it's not only 11%. In reality, if you look at the total cost of employment of what company spends in employing you, it is 34.75% that goes to Social Security. I don't know, George, if you know how much it is with with the Recibos Verdes, the Social Security.
Is near 24% by 70% of the revenue. So imagine that you have one receiver or an invoice with 1,000 euros. It means that 700 will pay Social Security for 24%. So it's more or less 168 that this person needs to pay to Social Security by month if you have the same amount by month.
Okay, thank you. And I guess the delta in which you don't pay Social Security by the whole, because the government believes like a part of it will be like cost of running your business, right? So that exempts you a part of the from taxation. The remaining, it, as you said, is taxed. But again, it is a little bit lower when you sum the personal payment and the company payment on a regular employment. So there's a few numbers here. Again, you can always follow up if you have more specific questions. Okay, so we have still time for questions, and they are keeping a good rate. Thanks for that, team, and everyone joining this webinar. So let's continue. Next one, will anything affect my company if I use an employer of record? Okay, great question. So, well, if you have a good provider as an employer of record, they should make available all these benefits to you, right? And I guess that's the right answer to this. And that means, personal income tax measures and programs like IRS Jovem, like NHR. All of that means that whoever is processing payroll, and in the case of the employer of record, is the provider of the employer of record service, will need to take that into consideration when processing payroll. Do they take into consideration? Well, it depends on if they are a good provider or not, right? We, at Bridging, we pride ourselves obviously to know all of these matters in great detail, but there are some global operators that operate all over the world, and then they don't really optimize taking into the local regulations into mind. So you should have access to all the opportunities, all the programs, but you are really limited to the quality of the employer of record provider that your company uses. All right, so the next one is if there's any significant news on ESOP taxation. So that's what I've mentioned before a little bit, which is we do have this notion now of the startup status, and you do need to have the startup status to access the beneficial taxation on stock options. By the way, ESOP, for those that don't know, is in employee stock options plan. And so you need to have a startup status. You need to apply to it, meaning you need to do innovative work. You need to have some part of your revenue to be spent in R&D activities, and you need to basically get that certification. After you get that certification, any stock option plan that you make in place to or employees will be be able to put under this new regulation, meaning that employees will not be liable to pay for stock options when they receive them, only when they exert the right to monetize them. And this is actually a huge, if I mentioned this before, but I didn't go to this detail. If this is not clear, imagine a situation, and unfortunately in the last few years, we did had a few situations where companies that were promising did run out of funds and went under. There could have been the case where, and I actually know cases where, you receive stock options, you need to pay tax on the perceived value of them, but then the company goes under and you never realize money out of them. So you pay tax by something you never realized. This is what actually happens in a lot of parts of the world, but it is very, very interesting that the Portuguese government made a law that now, if you are under that regime, you can actually not be subject to pay any tax ahead of time and only pay it when you actually, on an exit event of the startup and you exercise your option to exercise and get shares to, obviously sell them afterwards. Oh, thanks so much. I'll read that. So not a question, but a compliment. Thanks so much, Marianne, about the valuable. Appreciate it. Like I said, we've been doing this for a while, and I think with very good audience, very good questions, very good engagement, and we plan on doing this in the next few months and quarters. Okay, so still time for a few more. We plan to end at about 4 p.m. Lisbon time, but I see at least 3 more questions, so let's go through them. Good question. So has VAT been affected by the state budget? It has not, right? No changes regarding VAT whatsoever. So that's an easy one. Has it become any easier to set up a company in Portugal, or is it still the same? Well, we have seen progressive improvements. Some of the processes have become more digitized, be able to do online. I wouldn't say that it feels like there was any big change in the last 12 months or so, but Portugal, comparing to other countries, it is a little bit more agile. And I'll give you an example. So we at Regine, we have operations in Portugal and Spain. Portugal and Spain being members both of Iberia, there's obviously a lot of common things into law and the way the processes and the institutions work. It is, however, interesting to note that in Portugal, we are way more digitized. So there's a lot of things that you can do fully online in Portugal that you still cannot do in Spain. So, if you ask me where, for instance, where it's easy to start a company in Portugal or in Spain, I would say definitely in Portugal. Again, a few things can be done easily online. One of, let me just share with you also, add some fun to this. In Spain, one of the weird, maybe let's call it weird, things that exist is if you are a foreign resident, which is the case of our operation, because I'm the managing director of the Spanish subsidiary, I needed to go to the police station to get the documentation to be registered as a foreign contributor, right? So what we have in Portugal as a non-resident, non-tax resident. And like, why do you need to go, to the line with the police together with, potentially people there for crimes or, physical threatening or whatever to do that? So, and that feels very old-fashioned, I should say. So again, long story short, there has been strides in Portugal to make things easier. Are they super easy still? They couldn't always be better, right? But there's definitely a progress, and I think that's also important to highlight. All right, I guess we already answered this about startup law. So the question is not super relevant, but do you know anything about the startup law? So this is pretty much what we already discussed in terms of if you do get the recognition as a startup, you'll have access to a couple of things. One of them is the beneficial tax on employee stock options. A few other things is to be able to get people benefiting from the non-habitual, well, the new IFICI, but that NHR 2.0, because one of the conditions to benefit from it is, for instance, to work on a startup, because the recognition of the startup status does already prove that that company is doing highly qualified work or innovative work. So that's one way to prove it. But what we also see is more and more the goal to use that idea of that status of the startup status to connect more things, access to more benefits. And again, and I see someone else, thanks for this, Neil, appreciate you joining. But just, I guess, to wrap up, given that I don't see more questions, there is clearly a vibe in Portugal from lawmakers, and we hear different countries, all this polarization, left and right wing policies. But I think in Portugal there has been some consensus in terms of needing and embracing new ideas, entrepreneurs, startups, and you see that in the laws, right? Most of these laws do have pretty much consensus in parliament to pass into law. There's always discussion on the small parts, but just the idea that we have now unofficial recognition of what is a startup, that we have specific benefits for startups, I think is to say a lot about what Portugal can offer to entrepreneurs wanting to build and grow a business in Portugal. Okay, so I think we are all out of questions, so we'll wrap it up here. Thanks so much for attending this webinar today. Again, this was Brigitte talking about State Budget 2025 and how it affects your business. We'll continue to use and do more webinars like this, so keep tight and keep following us on social media. We are very active on LinkedIn. You can also visit at bridging.pt and reach out and check some of the content. And we do produce a lot of content from ebooks, articles, blogs, and so on, and so much. So thanks again so much for watching. Hopefully this was helpful and insightful, and we hope to see you again.